And joining us now to discuss this is constitutional law attorney Amir Benno and distinguished university professor at Two Row College, Thane Rosenbaum. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So we've seen this federal judge in Texas, and they've said that the United Airlines must pause its vaccine mandate for employees seeking a medical or religious exemption. Amir, let's start with you. What's your thought on the fact that we're seeing now more and more lawsuits happening to try to stop these vaccine mandates?
Well, Mercedes, I think it's a good thing that people are seeking to get their redress under the law. I mean, they're asking for something that federal law provides under Title VII, which is to allow for a religious, if you have a sincerely held religious belief, that the employer must accommodate that belief. If you also have some sort of medical disability, then under the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, the employer must accommodate that disability. And what we have here is if people are not getting the vaccine, they're either getting terminated or they're getting put on unpaid leave. And the argument is that's not a reasonable accommodation. That's tantamount to being fired. That's destroying somebody's livelihood. So they are actually using federal law to vindicate their rights, and I think that's a good thing.
Well, Thane, let's talk about where the order comes from. This comes from the executive branch, and you almost would expect if there were a law passed by Congress and signed by the president, it might hold up in the courts versus an executive order. I think it's through OSHA. Does that matter here?
Well, obviously, a congressional action would have more authority. But no, we've seen through the last several presidential administrations that executive actions is the perfect way to circumvent having legislative approval. The interesting thing, however, is that now you're seeing states like Texas that are using their police powers to prevent employers from even acting on these compliance with vaccine mandates. So now you have these real potential constitutional clashes between the police powers of the state and the federal government's authority to create these rules in light of a pandemic. Remember, the Supreme Court ruled on this over 100 years ago in connection with smallpox, and it said states have the right through their police powers to mandate vaccines. But here, do the states have the right to stop employers from mandating and being in compliance with the federal government and its requirement for vaccines?
Yeah.
Thane, you brought up a great point, because with that legal case on smallpox, it was more about the state police powers. But from the federal standpoint, that doesn't seem to be the case. So, Amir, let me turn to you on this question. How much power does the federal government really have to push through a federal mandate?
Yeah, well, that's a debatable question, but the fact of the matter is the federal government does not have police powers. Thane is right, that's a state power. So the federal government has to find its authority somewhere else. And they're basing their authority on the Commerce Clause of the Constitution, saying that they have the ability, the power to regulate interstate commerce. The problem with this argument, and they're saying that the mandate falls into regulating interstate commerce. The problem with that is 5 of the 9 judges on the Supreme Court have rejected that argument when it came to Obamacare, saying you can't mandate people to purchase health insurance. They said you can't rely on the Commerce Clause to force people to do something, even if it has to do with public health. So I think there's a strong and compelling argument that the federal government is without power to do this. And as Thane mentioned, they always seem to be taking the emergency route. They seem to be using the emergency provisions to ram through something that would otherwise take several months or years to get done. And so there's a challenge to the way that they've chosen to go about it that way as well.
So, Thane, then the Supremacy Clause. I forget what cases indicated that the federal government has powers over the state governments in some cases. Will they try to apply that here? Does it matter in this case?
It's a good question. Article 4 of the Constitution, yes. The question is that in most instances, the federal government's laws interpreting the Constitution override the state laws. But remember, it was just this summer that there was an attempt to stop the vaccine mandates an emergency petition before the Supreme Court. And Amy Coney Barrett did not wake up her fellow justices. She could have called them all up and said, hey, guys, we got a rule on this. She just basically said the precedent is already there, that the state has power when it comes, police powers, when it comes to vaccinations. And so the Supreme Court has already chosen to not weigh in when it had an opportunity this summer. And Justice Barrett did not even confer with her other justices. She just ignored it. So there is a supremacy argument, and Amir is right that these emergency efforts are their way to circumvent them. But the police power is very powerful in terms of understanding the separation between the government and the states. And this looks like a state matter. All
right. Gentlemen, we appreciate the constitutional law class. And if it'll be on the exam, I'll take the notes and study them. And
I'll get an A. I'm not sure about Bob. Okay?
Yeah, but I won't cheat. I'll write the honor code right there on my blue book. All right, gentlemen, thank you very much.